My brother Mark lifted his glass high, the room glowing with crystal and laughter. "Cheers to the Johnsons," he declared. "Except for Sarah, the failure of the family who only has money." My parents chuckled as if it were the funniest joke they'd ever heard. But I didn't laugh. I raised my glass too, steadying my trembling hands. "To the failure," I said, my voice calm enough to cut through the noise. "Who will stop paying for your wedding?" The silence that followed was sharp, almost violent, like every eye in the room had suddenly turned on me. For years, I had been the invisible sponsor, the quiet provider behind every smile in my family. That night, in a single toast, I broke the spell. What came after was not just a dinner gone wrong, it was the unraveling of everything I thought family meant. I'm Sarah Johnson, 34 years old, living in New York City. On paper, I'm the kind of woman people point to as an example of independence and success. I built an event planning company from the ground up, starting with nothing more than a laptop, a rented storage unit, and the conviction that I could create something memorable. Today, my team organizes corporate galas, celebrity weddings, and charity fundraisers that appear in glossy magazines. I've been featured in 2 lifestyle columns, praised for my creativity and professionalism. Clients respect me, peers admire me. Out there, I'm seen as accomplished. But at home, I'm still Sarah, the failure. My family doesn't care about headlines or contracts signed under my name. They care about one thing, the picture of perfection they want to display. Married children, stable homes, traditional roles. To them, I'm broken because I don't have a husband or children, because I chose ambition over conformity. The irony? For years, I've been the one holding everything together financially. When Mark struggled to pay tuition at Columbia, I was the one who quietly wrote the checks. When my father's heart condition sent him to the hospital, it was my credit card the nurses asked for, not my parents' insurance. When Mom called in tears about the mortgage, I wired the money without hesitation. I told myself it was family, and family meant sacrifice. One day, they'll see how much I've done, I whispered every time I transferred another $5,000. I thought loyalty was currency, and maybe, if I spent enough of it, I'd finally be worthy in their eyes. Looking back, it's almost laughable. I paid for Mark's first car so he could commute to internships. I covered Emily's graduate school tuition when she said her scholarship wasn't enough. I even paid for the renovation of my parents' kitchen so they could host family holidays with pride. Each time, I told myself it was temporary, that eventually they'd recognize me as more than the family ATM. Instead, the more I gave, the more invisible I became. Gratitude faded into expectation. Sacrifice turned into obligation. And while the world applauded my achievements, at home, I remained a background character, useful, but never celebrated. That night, when Mark raised his glass and called me a failure, it wasn't just an insult. It was the truth of how they'd always seen me, spoken aloud in front of everyone. What they didn't realize was that it was also the last straw. The night of the engagement party had all the markings of perfection, or at least, the illusion of it. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above tables dressed in ivory linens. The floral arrangements, towers of imported roses and orchids, caught the light just so, filling the air with fragrance that was almost suffocating. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, weaving the kind of background music that makes people feel rich even when they're not. To everyone else, it was magical. To me, it was a spreadsheet come to life, line items I had paid for, now arranged neatly in a room where I barely belonged. Every detail had my fingerprints on it. The champagne chilling in silver buckets, ordered under my corporate account, the caterer serving filet mignon and lobster, booked through my connections after Mom complained the original vendor was too ordinary. Even the engagement ring Mark slipped onto David's finger that night, shiny, extravagant, had been partially financed by a loan I knew would never be repaid. My mother had phoned me nearly every day in the weeks leading up to the party. "Sarah, we need special chairs, not those basic ones. Sarah, David's family expects imported champagne, not supermarket brands. Sarah, if we don't hire the right florist, it will look cheap." Each call ended the same way, with me logging into my banking app and transferring more money, promising myself it was the last time. The irony stung. My parents had always told me my choices were embarrassing my independence, my single life, my so-called obsession with work. Yet, here they were, leaning on that same work, that same income, to create the perfect facade for Mark's big night. As I walked through the room, dressed in a black gown I had bought more to blend in than to stand out, I caught snippets of conversation. Uncles praising Mark for his charm. Aunts gushing over the decor, asking my mother which planner she had hired. She smiled gracefully, never mentioning that the planner was me. I might as well have been invisible, a ghost haunting the party she was financing. At the head of the room, Mark and David were radiant, basking in admiration. Their friends clinked glasses, their laughter rising above the music. I watched from a corner seat, a silent sponsor. My stomach twisted with each toast, each compliment, each congratulation that reminded me of the role I played. The provider, never the celebrated. It should have been just another night of quiet sacrifice, another page in the story I had been writing for years, but the tension in the air was different this time. I felt it in the way Mark's eyes lingered on me when he raised his glass, in the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was preparing something. I didn't know what words were coming, but I sensed the blow before it landed. And when it did, it split the evening in two, the life I had lived up to that moment, and the one I would choose after. The clinking of glasses hushed the room. My father had just finished a polite, predictable toast about family and future, his voice steady but rehearsed. Applause followed, polite laughter, the kind that fills silence but carries no meaning. Then Mark stood, his silk suit catching the light, his arm around David as if the spotlight naturally belonged to them. The chatter quieted. Every face turned to him. He smiled, that same arrogant curve I had known since childhood, the one that always preceded cruelty. He raised his glass high. "Cheers," he began, his tone dripping with charm. "To the Johnson family, to love, to success, to the future we're all building together." The room nodded, glasses already lifting. He paused, his eyes scanning, finding mine across the long table. That pause burned, like the second before a blade drops. His smile widened. "Except for Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and sharp at once. "The failure of the family who only has money." It landed like a slap. A silence rippled through the crowd, followed almost immediately by laughter, my parents' laughter, loud and unrestrained. My mother's hand clapped against the table. My father chuckled with the easy cruelty of a man who had always chosen favorites. A few cousins laughed nervously, not quite understanding but unwilling to step out of line. The heat rose up my neck, into my face. My chest tightened, as though someone had looped barbed wire around my ribs. My fork trembled against the plate. Years of being diminished, overlooked, exploited, it all condensed into that single, humiliating moment. I could have stayed quiet, swallowed it like I had swallowed so many things before. But something inside me shifted. The years of sacrifice, of writing checks, of bending under the weight of obligation, they crashed together, igniting a cold, clear fury. I picked up my glass. My hand shook, but my voice, when it came, was steady. "To the failure," I said, my words slicing into the laughter, forcing it to a halt. "To the failure who will stop paying for your wedding." The room froze. Laughter evaporated, leaving behind a silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. My mother's smile collapsed, her lips parting but no words emerging. My father's glass hung mid-air, his face a mask of disbelief. Mark's grin faltered, then vanished, replaced by a flash of panic he tried to hide. Across the table, David looked bewildered, caught between loyalty and shame. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some clearing their throats, others staring at their plates as if the china could rescue them from the awkwardness. I set my glass down gently, the sound ringing louder than it should have. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time, I felt steady-rooted not in their approval, but in my refusal to give it any more power. "I've lost my appetite," I murmured, standing, pushing back my chair. Every eye followed me as I walked out, their silence clinging to my back like a shroud. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, cool and sharp against my burning face. My car was parked at the edge of the driveway, and as I slid behind the wheel, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. The tears came then, hot and bitter, blurring the road as I drove aimlessly into the city. But beneath the sting of humiliation, something else pulsed stronger: determination. This wasn't just about one cruel toast. It was about every moment I had been their scapegoat, their bank account, their silent supporter. And as I drove through the glowing streets of Manhattan, one truth crystallized in me: this was the last night I would ever let them define me. I drove for hours that night, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white through my tears. By the time I reached my apartment, my throat was raw from holding back sobs, my chest aching with every breath. I collapsed onto the couch, still in the gown I had worn to the party, my makeup smeared across the fabric. The silence of my home was deafening after the mocking laughter of my family. The tears came in waves. I cried for the woman who had always wanted her parents' approval, for the girl who once believed perfect grades would be enough. I remembered standing at the kitchen table years ago, proudly showing my report cards filled with A's. My parents glanced at them briefly, nodding, then turned to congratulate Mark for his average soccer game. That was the story of my childhood: my excellence dismissed, his mediocrity praised. I thought of birthdays where I bought my own cake, of holidays where my contributions paid for every gift under the tree, but my name was never mentioned. I thought of nights I stayed up late to finish proposals for clients, while at the same time wiring money to cover yet another family emergency. Every sacrifice blurred together until I could no longer separate love from obligation. The humiliation from the party replayed in my mind like an echo chamber. My brother's smug words, my parents' laughter. The sting of betrayal radiated deeper than the insult itself. It was the confirmation of what I had always feared. To them, I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or even a person. I was a resource. But as the tears dried, something colder began to settle inside me. Anger. Not the wild kind that lashes out, but the sharp, deliberate kind that clarifies. For years I had begged silently for recognition, measuring my worth in dollar signs. Tonight, they had shown me exactly where I stood, and maybe, just maybe, that was a gift. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And once you know the role you've been forced to play, you can choose to stop playing it. The morning after the party, I woke up with swollen eyes and a splitting headache. My phone lay on the nightstand, buzzing with notifications, dozens of missed calls and texts from my parents, from Mark, even from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I couldn't bring myself to open them. I already knew what they would say: excuses, gaslighting, guilt-tripping. Instead, I pulled my laptop onto the coffee table and opened my bank account. I began scrolling through years of transfers, page after page of money flowing out: tuition payments, hospital bills, mortgage, loans, vacations, car deposits, furniture. Each line item was a reminder of the countless times I had chosen their comfort over my own security. I printed everything. Within hours, my dining table disappeared under stacks of paper, highlighted sections glowing neon yellow against the white. I felt like a forensic accountant auditing my own life. Each document was a scar, proof of wounds I had tried to ignore. Somewhere between the piles of receipts and contracts, I remembered something my best friend Jamie had once told me: "Sarah, you need to keep records. One day, you'll need them." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now I realized she had been prophetic. Digging deeper, I opened my old email archives, searching for any trace of family correspondence about money. I wanted to be thorough, to have more than just bank statements. That's when I found a chain of emails from over a decade ago, marked with my mother's name, my father's, and a lawyer I vaguely remembered. My pulse quickened as I clicked. The subject line read, "Distribution of Margaret's assets." Margaret, my grandmother, the woman who had taught me to bake cookies in her tiny kitchen, who had always slipped me $20 bills with a wink, who whispered once, "You deserve a better life." Sarah. I was barely 20 when she passed away. At the time, my parents told me she had left almost nothing. "Just memories," my mom said with a sigh, as if it were a kindness not to burden me with disappointment. But these emails told a different story. There had been a small property in Connecticut, an old house Margaret owned outright, and a sum of money she had specifically requested be set aside for me. It wasn't a fortune, but it would have paid for college, maybe even given me the cushion to start my business without crushing debt. The emails detailed how my parents had quickly sold the property, funneled the money into urgent debts, and justified it with the line, "Sarah doesn't need it right now, she'll manage." I sat back, the room spinning. My hands shook as I scrolled through the rest. They hadn't just neglected me, they had stolen from me. They had taken the one gift my grandmother had intended to free me from their control and used it for themselves. Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time, they weren't from sadness, they were from fury. I printed those emails and slid them into a separate folder, labeling it in thick black ink. Inheritance. I stared at the word. For years, I had been paying for their choices, financing their lifestyles, while the inheritance that should have given me independence had been buried in secrecy. My grandmother had seen me, she had wanted to protect me, and they had taken that away. The humiliation of the party, the years of sacrifice, the weight of every bank transfer, they all fused into one clear thought. This wasn't just family dysfunction, it was theft, and theft could be fought. By the third day after the party, I had stopped crying. The grief was still there, heavy and sharp, but it had hardened into something else: resolve. I sat in my office, surrounded by files, highlighted bank statements, and the printed emails about my grandmother's assets. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim drowning in chaos. I felt like a strategist gathering ammunition. Jamie, my best friend since college, came over with coffee that morning. She listened quietly as I showed her the documents spread across my dining table. Her brow furrowed, and when I finished, she said, "Sarah, this isn't just family drama. This is financial and emotional abuse. You need a lawyer." I hesitated. Suing my own parents? Taking legal action against Mark? The thought made my stomach churn. But then I remembered Mark's smug grin, my parents' laughter, the inheritance emails. My hesitation dissolved. That afternoon, Jamie gave me the number of attorney Rebecca Miller, a family and civil law specialist. The next day, I sat in her office, clutching the folder I had labeled Inheritance. Attorney Miller was a woman in her mid-40s, sharp but kind-eyed, with a calm confidence that instantly steadied me. She listened as I told my story about the party, the years of financial support, the discovery of my grandmother's assets. When I laid the emails in front of her, she read them carefully, then looked up. "Sarah," she said, her voice firm but compassionate, "you've been a victim of long-term exploitation. What your parents did with your grandmother's inheritance is not only immoral, it's likely illegal. You have a case, and you also have the right to protect yourself from any further manipulation regarding the wedding." The words struck me like a lifeline. For years, I had been gaslit into thinking I owed them everything. Now, here was a professional telling me I had the right to say no. We spent hours going through my evidence. She advised me to keep everything documented, even the cruel texts and voicemails I had been receiving. Then, together, we drafted a letter. It was direct, not emotional. It stated in clear terms that I would no longer be providing financial support for Mark's wedding. It listed, in meticulous detail, the contributions I had already made, amounts, dates, purposes, and, almost as a quiet thunderclap, it referenced the inheritance issue, noting that I was aware of it and prepared to take legal steps to reclaim what was mine. "Tone is everything," Miller explained. "We're not threatening, we're declaring. This isn't about revenge, it's about boundaries and justice." And when the final draft was ready, it was printed on heavy cream stationery with my company's letterhead. It felt symbolic. The successful businesswoman they dismissed as a failure was now speaking in her professional voice, not as their daughter, not as their scapegoat. I signed it with a steady hand. The certified mail clerk stamped it with a satisfying thud. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for their approval. I felt like I was taking it back. The letter was just the beginning. Within hours of its delivery, my phone exploded. My father's furious voicemails, my mother's dramatic texts about how I was destroying the family, and Mark's late-night calls filled with venom. I ignored them all. Attorney Miller had warned me this would happen. When people lose control over you, they fight harder to get it back. Still, the storm intensified faster than I imagined. My parents showed up at my office, shouting in the lobby until security escorted them out. Relatives began whisper campaigns on social media, painting me as unstable, selfish, ungrateful. The betrayal stung most when my cousin Laura, someone I once trusted, leaked screenshots of private messages I had sent her, twisting my pain into gossip. And then came the summons. Great Aunt Margaret invited me to a family dinner at her home. She had heard there was trouble and wanted to clear the air. It felt like a trap. But Jamie reminded me, "You have the evidence. You have the truth. Go. Show them you're not afraid." So I went. The atmosphere in my aunt's dining room was suffocating from the moment I walked in. My parents sat stiffly at one end, Mark and David beside them, their smiles brittle. Other relatives filled the seats, chattering nervously about neutral topics, weather, work, anything but the storm brewing at the table. I took my place opposite them, Jamie by my side as moral support. Under my arm was a leather folder stuffed with papers. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, but my face remained calm. Dinner was awkward, filled with forced small talk and brittle laughter. My aunt, a woman of quiet authority, eventually cleared her throat. "We're family," she said, her voice steady. "We need to resolve this, not tear each other apart. Sarah, your parents say you're making false accusations. Why don't you tell us your side?" My father jumped in first, his voice rising. "She's lost her mind. She's ungrateful. We gave her everything, and now she wants to ruin her brother's wedding out of jealousy." My mother added, "She's twisting things. Always has been dramatic. It was a joke, Sarah. Mark didn't mean it." Mark leaned forward, smirking. "You've always hated me because I have what you don't, a real family, a partner. Admit it. You're jealous." I felt bile rise in my throat, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. The rustle of paper cut through their noise like a blade. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came to show the truth." One by one, I laid out copies of bank transfers, payments for tuition, medical bills, mortgages, vacations, highlighted amounts, dates, recipients. The table fell silent as the numbers grew, page after page. $500,000 over the years, every penny documented. "You say I only have money?" I said, looking directly at Mark. "But that money built your life. Without me, you wouldn't have that degree, that car, this party." My mother scoffed. "Families help each other." "No," I cut in, my voice firm. "Families don't exploit one member while mocking her as a failure. Families don't steal." I pulled out the inheritance file. My hands no longer trembled. 10 years ago, Grandma Margaret left me property and money for my future. I found the emails between you and the lawyer. You sold it. You pocketed what was mine. Gasps rippled around the table. My aunt's face paled as she reached for the papers. She scanned them, her lips tightening. Finally, she looked up, her voice low but firm. "It's true. I remember Margaret telling me she wanted Sarah to have that money. I asked about it years ago, and your parents told me there was nothing. But this proves otherwise." The room erupted. Cousins whispered in shock. David pulled his hand away from Mark's, his expression twisted in disbelief. My parents' faces drained of color, then flushed red with rage. "You don't understand," my father barked, lunging forward as if to grab the papers. "We had debts. We did what we had to do." "You lied," I said coldly. "You lied to me, to everyone here, and you stole from your own daughter." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "You're ruining everything. Do you know what this will do to me and David?" "Yes," I replied, meeting his furious eyes. "That's the point." For a moment, the only sound was the clinking of silverware as someone nervously shifted their plate. Then my aunt's voice, heavy with authority, cut through the chaos. "This family has lived behind a mask for too long. Tonight, the mask comes off." My parents shouted denials, my mother sobbing theatrically, Mark raging, but it didn't matter. The evidence lay on the table for all to see. The illusion was shattered. I gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood. "I have nothing more to say. The documents speak for themselves. Aunt Margaret, thank you for listening. The rest of you, you know the truth now. Do with it what you will. As I turned to leave, Jamie rose beside me. My heels clicked against the hardwood, each step a drumbeat of finality. At the door, I looked back once. My parents and brother sat surrounded by relatives, their reputations unraveling before their eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt free. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within weeks, Mark and David's engagement unraveled. David's family, humiliated by the scandal, broke off the wedding. Vendors canceled contracts. When payments stalled, payments my parents had assumed I would cover. Whispers spread quickly through the Johnson circle. The perfect family was nothing more than a facade stitched together with my money. My parents' reputation, once carefully polished, crumbled. Business associates distanced themselves. Friends stopped attending their dinner parties. To keep up appearances, they were forced to sell the very property they had stolen from me years ago. For the first time, they had to live within their own means, and it showed. They didn't stop trying to reach me, though. The texts shifted from rage to guilt. "Your father's health is fragile," my mother wrote. "If anything happens to him, will you be able to live with yourself?" Mark's tone alternated between desperate pleas and venomous attacks, but the difference now was me. I didn't answer. Attorney Miller handled every communication. Boundaries, once unimaginable, had become non-negotiable. At first, it was lonely. Walking away from your family isn't like closing a door, it's more like cutting off a limb. I grieved not just the people they were, but the people I had once hoped they could be. I mourned the fantasy of belonging I had clung to for so long. But in that emptiness, new life began to grow. I reinvested the money I used to spend on them back into my business. Without the constant drain, my company expanded faster than I dreamed possible. Within 2 years, we were organizing events for international clients, and one of our weddings landed on the cover of a prestigious magazine. For the first time, I celebrated an achievement without waiting for my parents' applause, and it felt liberating. Friendships deepened. Jamie became my anchor, reminding me daily that family isn't defined by blood but by love and respect. I even allowed myself to open up romantically. Last year, I met Daniel, an architect who values my independence and never tries to diminish it. He calls my boundaries strength, not failure. With him, I've learned what partnership feels like when it isn't transactional. Now, 3 years later, my apartment is my sanctuary, filled with colors and textures that reflect me, not them. The old family photos are tucked away in a box, not burned, but no longer hanging on my walls, dictating who I'm supposed to be. When I look back, I don't regret raising that glass at the engagement party. It was more than a toast, it was a declaration of freedom. The price was high, but freedom always island, and standing here today, I know it was worth every drop.